In my last PS90 video, I mentioned that accessorizing this rifle presents some unique challenges. The US accessory market is designed primarily around ARs and AR-like platforms, and well, this is not an AR. The particular challenge I'd like to talk about today is mounting an optic. Now, this is a standard Picatinny rail, but if you mount an optic up here, you run into issues with the height of the optic. To illustrate this, let me compare to an AR. Now, as many of you may know, the top of a rail on an AR sits 1/2 inch above the top of the stock, and standard backup iron sights or absolute co-witness optic mounts puts the center of the optic 1.5 inches above that, for a total height of 2 inches from the center of the optic to the top of a stock. Now, for most users, this 2 inches works very well. So if you place the stock just under your cheekbone and get a good cheek weld, your eye naturally lines up very well with the optic. Now, when the PS90 was first released, it came with a ring sight. Now, this was a basic zero magnification tube sight with either a white or black ring reticle. It was really a precursor to the red dot. Now, this optic mounted directly into this receiver bridge and really sat quite low, with the center of the optic at about 2.2 inches above the top of the stock, which, just like the AR, is comfortable for most users. But that was discontinued, and this configuration, what FN calls the standard, is the only configuration the PS90 is currently available in. Now, the standard PS90 does boast no less than 3 sets of iron sights. Now, the first set of iron sights is integrated into this rail, but not the way you might expect. It's a peep sight, with the peephole right there, and the corresponding post right here. Now, that hole looks pretty small, but at 1.9 inches above the stock, it actually falls pretty readily to eye. The next set of sights is a pistol-style notch and post, with the notch right here, and the post machined into the top of the bridge right here. And there's a set of those on each side, with the post and the notch. Now, these are 1.75 above the stock, and you have to squish your face down there to use them a little bit, but they would do in a pinch. Now, none of these sights are very fast to acquire and are probably better relegated to backup. So to me, the obvious answer was a micro red dot, and that's what I'm going to do. Specifically, I chose the Trijicon MRO. Now, the issue is that this rail sits at 2.2 inches above the top of the stock. So by the time you get a micro red dot, such as the MRO or a TRS-25 or an Aimpoint T1, even with their lowest mounts, on top of this rail, the center of your optic sits nearly 3 inches above the top of the stock. Now, I didn't order a mount with this optic, but I'll zip tie it to the rail so you can see what that looks like. All right, well, I've got the optic zip tied to the bridge. Now, keep in mind that with a proper mount, even the lowest mount they make, this optic would still be even higher than this, but it will serve to illustrate the point. By the time I find the center of the optic with my eye, I have a lot more of a chin weld than I do a cheek weld. And this is going to make it a lot less consistent when I mount the rifle, and it's going to take me longer to find the dot. It's also just less comfortable. I'm used to a good firm cheek weld. Now, there are a couple of solutions to this. First, if you can find a used tri-rail, an older version of the PS90 that had a different receiver bridge where the top is just a machined-in rail. That sat lower at about 1.5 inches above the top of the stock. So a micro red dot on that, the center of the optic would be about a livable 2.3 inches above the top of the stock. If you already have a standard version of the PS90 or one of the old ring sight versions, which uses the same receiver bridge that this one does, there's a company called TROS USA that makes a rail that mounts down inside the receiver bridge using these side rail mount screw holes. And that sits quite low, putting the optic about the same place as it is on the tri-rail, about 2.3 inches. Now, those are excellent solutions and puts the optic at a very livable height, and a height that some may even prefer. But having relatively high cheekbones and liking a firm cheek weld, I want to see if I can get the optic closer to that AR height of 2 inches. So the solution is this mount from a company called Design Machine. I found on fmforums.net. This is a direct mount for the RMR that, like the truss rail, uses these side rail mounting holes to mount down into the receiver bridge. It seems to be very well machined, fits the RMR well, and is even relieved in front to allow for the larger objective of the RMR without having to mount it higher. It also came with all the mounting hardware and some pretty decent instructions, brief but concise. And I also ordered with this 2 side rails, one for each side. And because you require a little bit longer screws when you mount the slide rails, those were also included. So I have 2 sets of those. All right, so the first thing is to get rid of the existing rail. Okay, the next step is to mount the RMR to the mount. And using the 4 provided screws, I've put some Loctite on these. All right, it fits on there really nicely. Okay, and now we just mount this to the receiver. Now I pre-fit this, and it is a pretty tight fit, and that's good. It means it's not going to wiggle around on us. What it also means is that it needs just a touch of encouragement to get in there and line up. So since I'm putting on the rails, I've used the longer screws, and they'll just go right through there first. All right, now once I have these on, I just tighten them in a crisscross pattern. These we can torque to 20 inch-pounds. Well, that did end up mounting the optic just a little lower than I could have gotten with the TROS low mount rail. And in fact, it got it very close, perhaps even a tiny bit lower than the original optic. Now it's still a little bit higher than AR, but it's low enough that when I quickly mount the weapon, I can get a good cheek weld and the dot falls right to eye. Plus, I think it looks really good. I'm going to call that one problem solved. Now the next challenge will be to put a light on this rig, but that's going to be in a future video. So I took this out to the range yesterday, zeroed up the optic, and put a couple of boxes of ammo through it. Now I also let other people at the range shoot it, and everybody found the height of the optic to be good, and everybody really liked the MRO. So I think we can definitely give a thumbs up to both the MRO and the Design Machine mount. Now, Design Machine also makes mounts for the RMR and the T1, and I would go as far as saying that if I was going to choose any of those optics, this is definitely the mount I would go with.